Can you hear me? Is it okay? I would like to welcome our special guest here, Winy Maas. Thank you for coming. I will not introduce his work because those who are interested in architecture should know his work. Those who are not interested in architecture or their interest is not crossing the borders of Czech Republic should know him. And I would need a lot of time to introduce your work. It's too complicated, complex. So in place of it, I will say my personal opinion, why I think it's important you are here today with us in Brno and in Czech Republic in general. I think that our guest brings to us a new perspective, new view about architecture, and the kind of view that we very much need. I think that this view, on one hand, is very critical to the historical architectural movements or discourses, but on the other hand, is not rejecting architecture. And me personally, I think that if I find any important and interesting critical movements in architecture in Czech Republic now, they are mostly very interesting from the social, political, economical point of view, but they sometimes too often reject architecture. We hear too many times that we shouldn't construct new buildings, that we shouldn't change our cities. And if we try to, then we hear that our architect's ego is overgrown, that we don't care about climate, etc., etc. And I think that those critics are very pessimistic on one hand, and on another hand are very nostalgic. And I think that this nostalgia, retrotopic nostalgia I would call, is very dangerous. It kills creativity. And that's why I'm happy that Winy is today with us, because I think that his work is very optimistic, full of energy, and of course, at the end, it needs a new concept of architecture. And every time when new meets the old, the clash happens, or very often. And that's why I'm happy that the title of this lecture is The New Old. Perhaps it's not so actual one, but the whole lecture, as I understand, gonna be about, will float around the concept of time and history, which is, I think, in your presentation, as I know your work, very interesting to us. So the stage is yours, and thanks for coming.
Thanks. Does it work? Thanks for the introduction. Can you hear me? Is it good enough? Okay, now thanks for... so my Czech is completely bad, so I will do it in English. I apologize for that. It is, although I now, since 3 months, I teach in Prague, and I should already have known better. But that is, it's in the mid of December, and I want to talk about The New Old, is the title indeed. These are the chapters I will take you through. It will take about like an hour and a half, so you can leave if you hate it, don't worry. But this is a sequence of thinking that I would like to share with you today. A sequence that is that started in the first chapter with what was just before. And then I take you to Prague, and I do a special request by the organizer, by Simon. Don't say the same thing as you did in Prague, which is, I think, indeed very good, because you repeat things. Many architects show every lecture the same. That's a bit, and it's actually bad, it's not good. We have to talk about actual elements. So what happened in Prague, 7 November, 2022. I used many dates today to give time a meaning and a position. And I talked about the future of architecture, or what I think it should be then. It was from now to then that I was speaking about in that. And I ended with a dream, with an utopia, which was biotopia. It's kind of strong belief that we only can solve everything through biological terms, ultimately. And it is, so these were images that were on that evening there. Students made a new planet as a starting point. They will do that tomorrow more, if this works. Does it work? Here. This was the audience, which is, that was a funny photo, to somehow deal with each other and how to point at certain kind of perspectives. You can see it on YouTube, don't worry. This lecture, it's a bit like the combination of Prague and Brno. It's like black and white. So I'll do also the same with the lecture. A question when I look back to it, and that is at the core of the word time, was biotopia futuristic? Or was it actually an ultimate form of, say, retroism as much? Because biology was there already at Adam and Eve's, and somehow we are a bit more busier, more intense, and then I go back to that, is what it was. So funnily, because of your request, Shimon, I see a loop over there. Chapter 2. Not all the chapters are as short as this one. So what is next then? In that, so I come to Brno, and it's now in time, and I thought, okay, let's look somehow on the word past. Past, you can write it with AST, and you can also write it with ASSED, what has been passed. So this combination is intriguing because it means that I go from then to now. And that is actually a philosophical combination that we have to stretch. Because in that from then to now to then, there is always a combination of new and old. The new becomes old. I become older, and etc. So it's almost a personal story that's happening of this contradiction in time that we are doing. New is always relative, old also. And so, and that gives also many opportunities to do that. So I call it retrotopia, after biotopia, to link to that, because of also this book that came out, in a way, where Sigmund tried with the most beautiful watch I've ever seen in my life to talk about what that is. And so he said instead it's re-emerging today as a vision focused not on the future but on the past, not on a future to be, but on an abandoned and undead past. That's what we could call this retrotopia. It is about like, it is a utopian spirit somehow. The word utopia is in it. It derives as a stimulus also, and it is an urge to also think about the failures of the past and the good things of the past, and probably the forgotten potentials of the past. Break. Better? Now? This is indeed better. Okay. So that is what it is. And it is indeed the word nostalgia comes in, as just has been said in that book. And using Paul Klee's image of the angel. An angel that flies over the city, like in the angel of Berlin. But in this case, the angel is washed away by the wind. And he's pushed forward in that notion. And is this storm then called progress, is philosophically the question. It is, of course, a way of, what does this flight of the angel mean? And if we look more closely to that, here it is. It is a kind of U-turn of the perspective of the ideal, that this is taken as say from paradise of the past to the future. There are many things to say. Rutger Bregman, one of the best journalists I know, Dutch by coincidence in this case, but he is, look at him, how he writes about our existence from a point of view of a journalist. So that is, this is terrible. This is okay, now better, yeah. Our society is so somehow happy with what we have that we don't want to dream about something else or even about progress in that way, and that blocks enormously what we say our evaluation is what he in this book tries to say, and what we can do that. The land of plenty is blanked in fog, is what we sometimes have, and I experience that sometimes also in Prague, to be honest, to see that. I think Svetlana Boym from Harvard, and she says that nostalgia is also a sentiment of loss and displacement on one hand, but it's also a romance with your own fantasy, if it's in a good way. I like that. She tries this combination. Here, this is the angle why we can do more than we think. That is written in this part. So I picked some pieces of it. But she warns, the danger of nostalgia, that it tends to confuse the actual home and the imaginary one. And that's exactly what we find everyone. So also the European Union, as he says, has this kind of case of nostalgia dominating in our zone. And that is a yearning for the good old days, almost, what is happening. And here we find a weakness in our construct that I defend so much. I love Europe. My love is maybe so big that I'm also drowned in blindness, is what she tries to say. So in that case, the term of this retrotopia is true to the word utopian spirit. It tries to find a way of living with it, and as a stimulus for hope in the end, to balance in between. So in that case, this lecture is completely different than the Prague one. And it balances ultimately between security and freedom. Because most of this nostalgia is security-driven. Fear, actually. And that is the opposite of ultimate freedom. And that's what I think has been said in So there is a beautiful epilogue in the book. Which says that an age of causes pursuing currently all these effects and that trace them, and that we need in a way to look forward for that change by unraveling this discrepancy between freedom and fear. So how to take a direction? And then I always look, in every chapter, I look back and I look forward. That is the construct of the evening. So what's before? And is what I would like to stare. Just very recently, and I had the possibility to work on Meren, hopefully your best building of the century after Tugendhat, as some of you said, on this very site that you know very much, in a place that is, say, surrounded by infrastructure on an island which is very difficult to go to, on a position where people go and come. I think it's a very wise decision to try to do something there on history and on making the stories not only of Brno but of Moravia more visible. You know it better, of course. It's a part of the Ringstrasse area. It is next to all kind of political institution, and you can walk to it. The Green Ring is not completed in a historical way. It has this kind of monuments that pass by and which are beautiful and make your story. It is also part of the Jewish history, and for me this was kind of a challenge to understand it. How many times in your life can you get the opportunity to think about this disaster of this 70 years ago, and when can I formulate a certain kind of opinion about it, is what you are trying to raise with this subject, and I find that wonderful. That is challenging, and I could not say no.
What I found beautiful is that not the site is surrounded by Jewish sites or formal Jewish sites, but there's also a collection of them that is in itself already worth exploring, worth understanding why it was there, how it looked like, and what it has given now also these days to you. And yes, also Tugendhat belongs to that. The reference is actually much deeper than you can imagine. And then you try to symbolize it sometimes in this kind of manner. Is that good enough? And the challenge of Marin is to see it wider. Then the Moravian Jewish history is even, I mean, you can say that Brno, maybe 40% of its urbanism was done by Jewish developments. And how loudly can we say that? Because then that when the Jewish left during the war for all kind of ways, then afterwards this expropriation continued in the communist time in a funny way, so you get a double reaction on this situation, much stronger than anywhere else on the world. That makes a necessity for this kind of, say, living with it, unveiling that kind of paradoxes and all the sentiments that are in it. I mean, if I read Hannah, the book, you can explore immediately how sensitive that is in such a, of say, guilt and non-guilt, of excuse and non-excuse, what is so part in that story. And that continues. You have the densest, say, almost Jewish settlement system after Israel. And in this, say, maps to be seen, looking to things, and it is weird to walk there, honestly, because you walk there and there are hot dog, sausage people. There are people that don't want to think about that history, that some of them hate the tourists that come by, and because of all the properties that have come along in this situation, and that makes it rather complex, and makes it, I think, worth to unravel, to unveil, to do something turn it somehow into a way to live with it in an optimistic way. That is what the challenge is to do. When I look to other Holocaust institutes, so not only to memorials, but to places where you document and find the stories, and then the architecture of most of the Holocaust institutes, and this is one of them, it's interesting to see how they look like. And I have no clue that these are Holocaust institutes. It looks as if most of them somehow hide itself away in neutrality. And that's exactly why be so neutral at that moment. Why do we need, how can an architecture be made that somehow deepens it instead of, say, abstracts it or distantiates it from such a kind of veil that comes in it? Program is beautiful. It's education, it is, you know it by heart, because you followed I didn't see the discussion very much, to be honest, so that's why I want to start with it. So then we have done it, and then I can go to the other stories. But it's research that comes into it. The site is small. That means basically you always have to stack programs 4 or 5 stories, otherwise you cannot deal with it. So it is limited on its site, but that's okay to do that. And we call that project also Unveiling Moravia. And how can we do that? How can we make on that site use of it? By a program, this is what it is, only 3-story high, another box. Or do we rebuild maybe the old, say, cafe where everything started? Or do we make a neutral box again? So we reduce the footprint to give some space around it, so that when you cross a zebra, that you first find, a kind of garden or plaza where things could happen. Do it as abstract as possible, that you can walk around it. No corner, please. So that and then stretch out to maybe a new viewing platform where I can notate all this history. But actually I walk on a glass map where I can see which one town was doing what, which is interactive and could turn into this platform that you want to go to and have this view over the city that described, and the landscape that is described by it, and stretches to all ends. And somehow, if you make that as a journey from its abstraction ultimately to its cohesion, then maybe there is a message there. Maybe it's also an attempt to talk about minorities in a general way, to give them the space to note data, to make those maps, and to feel it then in this collective platform where you can dance on top of the map. In that map, there are all these kind of towns. They can lit up in the Jewish epoch. No, okay, let's give them a place. Let's also see them as maybe things that you can stretch down towards the kind of hall. So when you enter on the lowest floor, there's this kind of new kind of cupola that's constructed by lights to a distance. And that gives a signal that it is a Jewish institution, but it's more than that. It also dissolves maybe in this new kind of plaza on the ground floor, and it points at something in heaven. Here you see how the domes come together in this new cupola that could be then done, how the entrances, how it also opens up the veil by this kind of new plazas that are there. How you can insert in these cupolas the transport, and how the different programs are. This is a journey through the documentary system, through the library, through the education part, and through the museum itself from the bottom to the top, and come out on this dance floor on the top with its how it's then positioned in the ring. That's the construct of what a paradox of the past and of the future is somehow there, suggesting abstraction and being concrete as much as possible, that it escapes from this kind of corporate buildings that are normally done in these Holocaust institutes, that escape, but not too much. I'm not going to make a kind of monumentalism out of it. It is a subtle suggestion that makes that possible and that creates that journey from the bottom to the top. Where could we imagine such a kind of space then? That adds to the cupolas in Brno culture of the past. And then here, the small film, how that could be, that feeling, this veil that comes from abstraction to concreteness, how these stars of the past somehow are illuminated from the top, and how they illuminate ultimately this new cupola in your city was, let's say, our dream. And that leads then to a position that on this spot was what we tried to do, and to give this platform to the world that blends you with the environment. And when you walk around in the time, then this is how this veil shows itself to the surrounding. You can see it when you drive around it on your bike and in your car every day as something that then almost moves and that is then illuminated from below. This is how it can then turn into a lantern into that city. Suggestive, yes, as a kind of new lamp that would exist there, that leads to this kind of party on the top, and that is placed in this area, and that I hope to have to give a kind of construct how to live together, how to go through this journey, end up in this glass map that becomes then this kind of platform for your city, and understand a little bit the position of Moravia in the wider context. Yes, in the railings, it goes further the story. It points at Warsaw, or it points at Amsterdam at a certain moment to describe this study even more when we do this kind of, say, suggestion. So what's next? And you have chosen for this at the moment. And with all the respect, we are friends. But honestly, I think that it is kind of a pity. I'm a bad loser, I know. But it is also like, is a spiral then the ultimate way of symbolizing such an anachronism of time? Is this unveiling what could be done? Just a question. I know it's late, but it will be good to discuss it among you, what is the best that you can have, and how to create also in next steps a little help on keeping on with it, making this kind of objects that discuss your situation, that discuss your position in Europe and in a wider context. So what is next is my next chapter on it. And that is because in the sequence of time, I use that word a lot, and it refers, I think, to this moment in time. When he died, then Time magazine, what's in a name, asked to us the question, what happens next in this development of this whole, say, data and information technology in that way. I found that beautiful somehow, that you celebrate almost his death with that kind of element. It's as if almost the evolutionary comes alive. And evolutions is what we are talking about. I think architecture should be about that. If I talk about mirroring, then it's exactly about this evolution in time and the welcoming that direction. At the same time, Yuval made this book, and everybody has read it, I know, but it's still fantastic to see some of these quotes. We are in a constant flux, and it's random, but does it have a pattern? Or, in other words, does history have direction? And then the answer is strongly yes. So we can do things. Despite our fear, we can a little bit direct our elements, is what I pick up out of this direction. I think and that's what today's maybe discussion is a bit about, or my lecture is a bit about, how to twist history. How to create a little bit, how to be like a Trojan horse, and I come back to that, in this operation, is what is actually he is asking or suggesting. So I have to stand here. Again, what's before in this chapter? 2004, I made a book, KM3, looked like that. And it was about capacity of the planet. How much can we have here and handle to survive in the nearby future, space-wise? And that is what architecture is about, to facilitate that. But what is then next? As we speak, I try to make a next volume in a way, and that starts with this. Yeah? But what can I do then? I can turn it into KM4. I can say, add the text what's next, and I can talk about ACT, because it's about time. The evolutionary city comes there, and it's an excursion on times, is what it wants to do. Simple, or is it actually helpful? For myself, it's helpful to position, say, the work in it. So what is next? And now I want to, 2 weeks ago, Dan Berjovsky, who's a beautiful artist, made, he innovated his murals at the moment. He did something in 2019, this in Eindhoven, and does it again. And you know him, because he is like, has this quotes, but he's on time. Beautiful, you see what he adds in a belief, a walk through this new painting comes in. He adds fear. We talk about fear partly today, also as an intimidating suggestion. He talks about fake that we're having, and to see what is, and he adds, scratched out certain elements in order to say that these were done and now we can make it better. This is, I think, of course, the EU come in and the UK goes out. It is about this character that it becomes positions. It's about refugees, as we speak, of course, a reality close by. Here in this case, it's about real and fear as an anachronism. So he adds in that art, like pieces that are beautiful and inspirational, not only because of its quotes, but also exactly because of its continuity. So strong men in the last years are tweeters more than their muscles. Think tanks are important to establish, and I do hope that Czech Republic will do that as a position in Central Europe, and I spoke about that in Prague, to make that institution here and not in Frankfurt, please, because you are in between two, say, situations, and probably the most safe one of the whole puzzle. So what is next? I'm happy that to show that timeline, and I did that, I think, in that lecture, when I went from then to now to then, and that can be done by this. Timelines are so important to say what we are doing. If I think about algae, this was a couple of years ago, how we could do, but then these, in the coming years, we are investigating in our industries better usage of different kind of plankton and plants and weeds to produce energy and to keep that as material. When this is, Rotterdam could finally become beautiful if I only do it in a kind of algae Rotterdam that would look like this, and what kind of liberty would that give? So these timelines also can be characterized by different functions. Self-healing, we want to do that much more. This is all the elements we need the coming 200 years to ask from our concrete industry to do something better than they have done before. And that leads also to, say, structures that repair itself. And we have to know that minimally 40% of our existing buildings in 40 years from now, we have to repair, and we have to change it again into another direction. New plans come in, new networks come in. I think the mycelium deserves, of course, much more honesty and much more working out in biochemical terms, and that could lead also to another kind of way of treating that kind of component. And finally, of course, we have to do it with plants, with the biology. Also, this kind of sequence of training the plants and being active and being quicker could lead then to much nicer things than the Torre del Boscos that are now coming up, and leads to probably more freedom, is what this says. It looks like a history that is actually endless, is what we construct. And if some of you say at the moment that Prague should be always Baroque, what I saw in an exhibition in Prague, I wonder, come on, it's more than Baroque, isn't it? So there is where do I miss the brutalism in it? I think actually this discussion is and the evolution on it is what the beauty is of our cultures, to make it endless. It stages also inventions, not only interventions, but here we can find innovations to do that. And then history becomes high story. So it's a kind of, it has more a pleasant name, is what I would propose for your universities, to give it a twist. Chapter 4, what's next? I'm now, for a moment, at the authors, because I started in the meantime, but say it was 92 that I started together with Jacob and Natalie this firm, which has, you can see us here, more people come in, and we're now working on more places, do more stuff. So in these 30 years, you can do things. I'd say that also to students. You can exactly do. I mean, 30 years ago, I was here in Tugendhat for the first time, and I saw the Maas. No, it was 35 years. And and you see the changes that are there. Now someone brought me around and is probably in 35 years doing similar, say, compositions as us. What was an important moment is when you start an office, how to connect it with research. There are more offices doing it. And OMA invented AMO as a research tank, but did it in a very commercial way. I decided to do it in a public way. So to do it in universities. In universities, that obliges you to do things which you cannot do in a commercial zone. And it also is about free thinking and stretching the thought. And that leads at the moment, that was the invention of, say, the birth of in 2007 of the Y Factory. And I'm happy that we now work also in Prague on, say, on that kind of methodology. It is important in architecture to talk about this thing. So that's why it stages our debate in this way. It makes products, it shows books. Many university activities are a bit hidden, and we have no money anymore for making good publications or fantastic websites to communicate, to refer to each other. And that's actually, you make history by doing that, and that's what we have to encourage, because then you start to understand time and to position the work in that way. This book series, is just one small tool to do that, and to explore all the phenomena, concentrating on one subject, the future city. You can do it in many other ways that I know, but in this case, to reveal that. Chapter 5. What is next? I want to talk about the word re. Re is an important and beautiful word. It's a tone in music, but basically it covers it covers a lot about everything, from evolution to revolution, from act to react. This re is happening much more in our language than we think. So 2009, we made this book in the Y Factor, The Visionary City, where we try to explore basically how can architecture be visionary. I mean, Boulez was fantastic because he made this kind of space where in the night it was day, and in the day it was night. So extending in that way our potential, or where gravity was tested. Wow, that was really nice. Since the 70s, visions have steadily decreased. We have made a generation that is worried about visions. Visions have turned more into religious leaderships than into architectural leaderships. And that, on the other hand, when you look 100 years ago, we have produced many, say, visions in more than ever before. So how to redefine, I use the word this word, how to redefine the word icon that carries that elements, which is loaded. You cannot make icons anymore because they are too intimidating or they cost too much money, which is not the case. You try to make something that says something and that wants to go beyond, say, the production that we did of day-to-day life. There's actually a lot of motives how visionaries can be born. And that was the research that we did, also funny, from search to research, is to go, and some of these motives I want to show now in this perspective. Here you see the word the old and the word the re. The old is, if I look now to all the listed buildings that we are producing, then in 10 years' time, in the UK, millions of buildings have been listed like this. So we are careful. We want to keep them. And also here, a very beautiful collection in the US of what is seemingly has a lot of value to everybody. The danger is that that you can see now that people make houses two things, that there is a kind of fashion at the moment to make 30s houses or 70s houses because people believe that due to that they keep their value. So many houses, new houses in the Netherlands look like if they were built in the 30s. And how boring is that? And I dream of the moment that there are so many of these neo-architectural houses that market collapses. That is what, because then scarcity of modernity comes in again, so we can deal with it. So it's about freezing. Freezing, this image shows that a bit, how do we freeze and where do we open up? The word re came also in as a motor of discussion where we need visionary in that way. And that's what here is happening. I just explained that. This is the new Netherlands, where copies of these old houses are everywhere and get to a certain moment the highest level of mortgage, but the value at the moment is decreasing for this kind of monsters that are everywhere. And that is, so the re becomes a copycat that reproduces itself. How does that relate to the word future? This shows a research how much we already spent on thinking on the future and how many games are made on future. Even at that moment, the Matrix was sold out by millions in a couple. There is a desire to understand a little bit, to cover that issue of fear. And this is marketing that element. So here you see new and old somehow coming together. So we tried, and it was before the depot in Rotterdam, to visualize that, but a new, say, boule, I could imagine, where you reflect so much of these existing copycats that therefore you see them endlessly and then maybe become a bit aware of the ridicule that is somehow taking part in our urbanism. So what is next after that book? 2013, I go further, and this was a lovely exercise, I think, in Berlin, of looking, we call them the Berlin sequences, but actually it's about consequences, where you see that the renovating in Berlin is the most expensive job done. This is the most expensive building in Europe at that very moment to make that believable again. So we simply want, this one was much cheaper next door to do that. These are the maps of Berlin, how it was, how it became, and how Stiemann wants to go back to it in this kind of direction. So there was a marketing on Berlin of doing, so we tried to fantasize on different, say, speculations that we could imagine. Look to Dahlem-Dorf, quite a Nazi area in Berlin in those days, but imagine, oh, this goes too quick. This is funny. Did I do that? It is filmic, that's true, but you're going back a bit. Okay, something is happening in Dahlem that we wanted to be quick through it. That you could imagine that due to new freedoms, due to climates, Dahlem would shrink and would turn into a complete other settlements in about 200 years. one hypothesis of a students group to think about it, and turn ultimately in this kind of cityscape. Maartzaan, which is phenomenal. It's a bit like Cosmonautu in Prague, but it's quite hip and quite social, and it turns into an enormous shopping malls at the very moment. It has maybe other kind of transport inspired by it, and it could gradually turn into such a kind of dream. The Museum Insel, how does that look like? Does it become more singular? Does it stress itself by itself? Is it more strong because of capitalism? That the Insel almost is the last leftover of that epoch? Is that what is going to happen? The Nikolai Viertel is claiming that church as a frozen element in a liberty of the rest. Potsdamer Platz, that became so big that and then fell down because of a new kind of global crisis and turned into this pit. The Spree, can that really be the motor of the Berlin exercise or transform into a new El Dorado? Can the Reichstag survive after all that, or will it be a symbol of the breaking of the European Union, etc.? It was as if that exercise showed a bit the lightness of being of that history with this overview of potential. So what is next? 2014. I was working also in Berlin on on the Kurfürstendamm. And you have this building, which was for the Hitlerjugend, and was at a certain moment, and heavy as it's. And what can we do with that and turn it into a livable zone? That is here on the Kudamm. Commercial after the Friedrichstrasse to invent it again. So it is actually completely fake. Everything is out of steel, and it's made with this neoclassical element from say 300 meter long, stretching through the Kudamm to the other side. So in order to open it up, I behaved a little bit, say like an artist. I took my knife and said maybe the best is to cut away simply a street through it so that you can see the courtyard and that you expose therefore the section of the building that turns into a kind of demonstration of the Disneyism of that Nazi epoch, and to turn it again into a destination where you're surrounded by this inhabitation. A kind of cut Berlin as a proposal to live with it or to dissect it from and with its past. We didn't get it in the end. The mayor there didn't want it, and it became actually a very unused element these days. So, and now we are talking about the new old. When we are talking about that procedure in the Y Factory to think about past and think about future, intersected with this knife act. And then with the new old project in the Y Factory, we try to think about aging. So there's a list of things of programs that we can look, how old can they become? There's an economical value, there's a social value in it, there's an ecological value. And there are many factors that are defining the issue of oldness, from money to circularity to decision-making process. So we try to make them and to understand that. And we gave it a timeline and categorized, say, which things stay forever, which things stay short. Facades are not 25 years, and interiors is 9 years, what the Times is doing. We went on the sizing. Some things are so big, but needs also so much time. I mean, the issue of rivers that dry out, that is a long time, and it's a big elements to think about time and monumentalization, what they need, where other things are very small, things that also want to be monumentalized. Some phone boxes in the UK are all monumentalized these days. You can make maps out of that. And these maps can say something. For instance, here a map of all the abandoned towns. These were beautiful pieces, but are now not there anymore. So what dying villages, how that looks like. Drying rivers, where are they? That are monumentalized. How do we do with the lungs of which are or our melting world? How is that looking like the landmarks of humanity and the birthplaces of automobiles? This is the habitat of the cemeteries that are not in use anymore. How military bases and its density. The Olympic legacy, how good is it and how monumental is that? How is the world of asphalt working on in the nearby future? Or these retail jungles that we make on many places. These are the maps that somehow are quantified and show a little bit of the understanding of cycling and recycling and how big is the operation of monumentalism of time. This is the map that comes across what in time, at what moment we have to do something with it. And that leads then again to per element to kind of concept of the re. So remove, remember, relocate, reuse, repurpose, reshape, rethink. It is fully re-exercise. If you look to the different images of this element, then at a certain moment, poof. And I love this image. There's somehow, like you have this kind of Japanese pictures where you block off things that you're not allowed to see. It's as if this is going to happen at a certain moment. And that leads then to visions, to replace it by something that could be there, that we need over time, and it gives a big, say, a potential for that. I think we have to change the direction. No, that's okay. 1 second. It's not an apple, that's why. Yeah, thanks. Chapter 6. What's next again? This is the moment that I want to show. Actually a generator of architecture, a project that wants to show through copy-paste, what we could do after this observation of the quantity of things that will change, will age, and will to be adopted over time. That chapter is not finished yet in our research, but it will come soon. There's a lot of memories that we have, and that's one of the stories that we can see. So again, what's before, if we look to the memories? I take you back to 2013, when we did in Copenhagen, in this city, we were with this. And how can we reuse these silos? And normally, when you have silos, they have a stiff wall, and then you make housing like this kind of pipe pieces into it, where you have one door, and then here a couple of windows, and that's it. But it's not the ideal. So we suggested to do the inverse, to nothing do in the silos, but hang the houses, because the walls are so stiff, so that you have a perfect, say, view over the environment. And that is what that's here you see it under construction, how they hang, and how the apartments basically suspend from this interior, how you can walk around, how you can have everywhere a good view, even from your toilet or from your kitchen, and have this kind of, say, Guggenheim feeling in the very court to deal with it. So you didn't touch the walls. It became minimally only with 2 anchors per house and 1 door, and you could reuse it in a kind of in a kind of nice way. Not more to say about that than that. So what is next? 2015. So 2 years later, what happened? I look at my watch and I get this. And I see, whoa, where is this? Nordhaven, that is not us. So we went there and then saw another architect doing this. That way. So what do you do at that moment if you see that happening? On one hand, you are proud. Okay, that's seemingly people like it. But also you call your lawyer and to say, what do we do with IP rights and how much should we do it? So we came to a deal in the end, to be honest, so to avoid the court case. But this was that sentiment is more happening these days. You inspire each other. So the issue is now a little bit, how can we do? And in the meantime, clients want to pay for originality. In Pritzker Prize winners are original per definition. But yeah, your beautiful furniture here around the corner, these I can buy them on internet much cheaper if I wish to do that. This is a building of OMA. This is our national bank in Oslo. Who was first and who was, or are we both inspired by this subject? Or this building of us in Paris, and then this building of OMA in Singapore. What is, okay, we're friends, is what we say. It looks like that we operate together as architects much more. We see good things and bad things and try to work with it. Our tower in Milano and say another tower in Bangkok by a colleague, a village in Wai Lam Rhine, and our village in Taipei, as we speak. But there are differences. I think it's normal, basically, that we are close to each other. Also in competitions, you will see picking things. I was just talking about one. And that is, in this case, this is an urbanistic plan, by making houses that are real, where Vitra is about showing a potential element. So there is, we do things together, but we believe, I think, also in same agenda. In the case, big building that becomes small in the stacked housing or the vertical village. That's more. It's of course funny examples. France and this in Australia for an Aboriginal community. Wow, actually, it's quite strong if you can do that. There's this black version. I never would have dared to do that. How can you approach an inclusivity in this way? Not everybody believes in originality. Hilbesheimer went on with this kind of drawings. New Istanbul looks like this endlessly. In the meantime, we arrange originality more and more through this kind of consumer products that personalize itself. Of course, copying was already part of art, a lot of in our museum. So simply, there is a culture there, or there is a discussion on how originality can be done. And architects are a bit stupid normally, because originality, so you want to be original. And everything that looks a bit is immediately killed in our press. It's like, while it maybe is better than the original. Can I beat Tugendhat, make it better? When I walk around that, I can see that the piano is on the wrong place. The wall, say, on the terrace is terrible. So I can see that we can innovate that. So let's walk on copy-paste. So this book, try to theorize a little bit. Of course, the copy-paste starts with the biggest disclaimer that you can do, because then it is saying basically already that we are having, that everything is a copy in this book. We start to look already to things that look like. There are many pixel buildings already in the world, and already from the 20s coming in. There are many pyramids. There are many buildings with a hole that love to be built. So seemingly, we use each other repertoire to position it on certain places. Sometimes it becomes better, and it could be nice to evaluate that. So these generations can be described actually almost like in our software. We have if you have, say, a Rivet or other programs, then you can see you start with a shape and then it deforms, or you add attributes to it to deform it. So there is a structure already in the technique of architecture to think about that. In the meantime, this journalist I love this. He made only articles about this. Who is Zaha of this too? Was a question, and then it turned out that it was someone else that made this. Also, our market hall, and then this one in Florida, was immediately compared. I didn't know about the building, but to be honest, but okay, fine, fair enough. It's kind of, we are there. It's good critical composition to look at things that are there. So there are hundreds of articles that we analyzed and that are in the book. It is also like copy-paste is about copyright. What is right and wrong? So we looked not only to examples, there are laws and ethics that are in that suggestion. There's a world of patenting that also Rem Koolhaas at that moment tried to do. So we worked further to think more about copying in a way, or copying is actually referencing. If I would be a medical scientist, then I have to refer, because what one did with heart attack research, I can only improve it a little bit. And then I got a Nobel Prize because I did it better. So why don't architects do that also? Make that references more clear, but say also what is better, what was bad about that kind of elements. That would be an advice, especially for the schools in Prague, to do that. You know, I guess you don't do that. No, you have to do that. You are the Rotterdam of Czech Republic, so you are more free than Prague, I hope. So this was an exercise about photoshopping. And what are the tools? You have a library always in Photoshop to have, you can put things in, which you can order, and then start to group on how that could look like. And here a process of gradually photoshopping a building for, in this case, for a person, and you see coding appearing of, say, the things you shopped in from Toyo Ito or from others, and then, but it was better than Toyo at that moment. So this was the group that did it. I just take you for a moment to the film because I like it so. Is there sound? There was sound.
Like in the small Russian city will be the location of the monument. The project itself will be derived from a building that expresses energy. We use the facade of the building for our monument. At this stage appears the function of the monument. People experience change in time by sailing from the old city to the modern monument. The building facade is made of steel, expressing the strength of the Russian general. But the experience of traveling through time can be more intense. So we try to let the landmark become clearer by stacking and turning the building. Eventually we transformed it into a bridge. In this way, the experience of change in time will become more intense.
It was as if this whole operation was coded and turned into the DNA of this project. It's ironic, I know, but on the other hand, this is a part of our current practice, to work on this way of communicating with what others are doing, and interfering in history is what we're basically doing. Another project that we do in the copy-paste book is El Croquet. Well, you know El Croquis at the moment, and we asked them, can we do one issue of El Croquis about like copying? And we called it El Croquet. And then you can see how one building in Amsterdam, if you do it 20 times, you get a fantastic skyscraper. How you demontage a block of the 60s, and then you have the nicest, say, building I could imagine in Ostrava, something like that. Or if Sanaa finally makes towers, which she doesn't because it is not humble to do that, then somehow you get this. And this is my love for the building, the competition for the park around Saarinen, and this arch in the middle of the US. And just add one extra, and the whole world will know you. That is what this entry did. We lost, of course, for the students. That was so cynical that was impossible. We made a game of clones. That is basically if you want to make a city and make a game that tests certain kind of topologies. So here you see what kind of things you could test. You could a building of OMA, and in 6 rounds you have to compete with other typologies in order to see how it survives under different programs. So, for instance, culture, round number 1. How would this building of Herzog and Dumoulin resist versus other buildings of other players that are doing that? So in round 2, the healthcare, does that equipped for that building in Miami, or is Sanaa better on it? So also for education, who fits better? Who does it good in shopping, and what does it good in office or housing at that moment? The funny thing, it gets a winner. This typology became the best and the most applicable under this kind of criteria, and others became not so good. And what we then show in that game is basically that the battle game is shown in this kind of format. So you go into the neighborhood, you see how they are used in different moments in time, how much success they got and how many blocks they got, and actually fantastic new kind of Barcelona comes alive, how there's such a city. So gaming is part of our understanding of, say, who is the best, who is the fittest in this typological terms, is what this game of clones is suggesting. Ultimately, it goes about generation. And it has 2 words, generating and generations is what we are dealing with. So again, using all this knowledge in our software, basically in Rivet, to see how the search for this originality can be made. Starting with knowing ancestors is what you can see on this slide, and how there are say, movements from the ancestor type to different directions, and developing a kind of code of the operations that you do. Like we showed in the copy-paste, that's also happening in this model. And if you do that for every type, from the cube, I can come to this. From I can come to this, I can come to this, in this kind of formal actions, but that is symbolized by, and that positions then that work. And if you do that, then you get this as a kind of toolbox that generates this new step, is what this generator is suggesting. Chapter 7. What's next? I go to interpretations. First about generation, about like referring. It was chapter 6. Now about, say, interpreting history is what is. So what's before? I start with that again. In 1980, I was born in a village which is much smaller than Pardubice, and where it's also has some ugly parts. And so bombarded by Americans in that moment. And I wrote a letter to the mayor to say, can we not make that city more beautiful? And to transform it into much more like a direction. And they gave me answer in like a month afterwards. The mayor said, yeah, good idea, Mr. Maas. I will come back to you. Now, that is what is next. That is then 30 years later, he called me and said, now it's time to do it. You made some buildings over the world, so maybe it's good that Schijndel, what's in a name, can do it. This was the old map of Schijndel, with all the old houses, looked like this, quite cute, and then, boom, this bombardment came in. They made modern urbanism, so it stretched out the rest, and then you had this as a non-hard. So from this to this was the step. And what can you then do? He asked me, he said, no, it's not so, what's the target? Yeah, people should know Schijndel. Okay, the easiest one is to make a tower of 400 meters, and then you can see it from Paris, and that gives a kind of, so they took it serious for a year, up to the moment that the alderman had to leave, because it was impossible. Then he had, okay, one chance, the last chance, to deal with it. And now you have to do it with a complete council. There are 17 parties in the Netherlands. So imagine the cacophonia that you have to do every Thursday evening when you go there. So what they said, what I asked them, yeah, how big should the building be? Not too high. How long should it be? Like this? No, like this? No, in between. How thick? This? No. This? No. So and it's endless height, idem dito. Not too high, look like a neighbor. So what they chose after all the sessions is this. Okay, this is done. That's the result. Funnily, if you look to Schijndel, then everything is like this. So this is how the buildings look like. You make photographs of them, and you start to see what they are having in common, where they are, and we take one, we measure it with this scanning technique, and how everything was in, we calculate, and we calculated the average of all these 500 buildings that are there, and this is the average. That's actually interesting, because it's half of what they want. So this is Freudian, of course. They want to be bigger. So they immediately said, okay, that is a good idea. We make the biggest glass house, the biggest house thinkable. So imagine that you have doors which are like higher than this. And they said, this is like showing that we want to be bigger. Yes, you don't want to have a skyscraper, so you end up with a double farm house. It's ironic, no? Yes, this is, but irony can be perfect in architecture because it says something different. Okay, we take it. But then normal material, yeah, no problem. What is that? Bricks, straw for the wood, and glass. Glass, oh yeah, glass is okay. So that you can see here how it is, how it's the average farm. We made pictures of all the farms and blended it in. And how the windows are there, make a garden around it. But yeah, did it in the end in one material, because that was then the choice. And he said, you took a trick, because now we make maybe an art object out of this. And you make the biggest, say, glass farm ever done. Yeah, but look, this is, here I can work with an artist to show everything. It's architecture of 2 millimeters that we are doing, and a history of 2 millimeters. Everything comes together in this print technique, and in the interior you have the biggest rose window of the Netherlands. So if I go in, I always see your farm. I see your history, the average part of the history. Even if I wash my hands or go to the toilet, it's part of the game and how to eat there. It is as if this is the holy farm that we could make that competes with the cathedral of the whole area. And then yes, it's a scale like this. It has some commercial functions in it. And it is a transformation of, say, the city towards the building is what we somehow tried to do in this situation. And it became a lantern that is showing itself. It caused a fight to get this, because is it alien or is it actually sublime? And now, when you go there, tourists are there. The mayor didn't speak a word of English and is in the end speak English. The Japanese like this as an idea because after the flood they need to do also something with memories in that way. And somehow it became like a method to say that you can do that on a public space. You make the public space better, but you do it in a way that everybody can understand a piece of its DNA in it. So that was a way of an attempt to make history one step further. But what's next? The mayor of Amsterdam went also to Schijndel, so royal visit, and it was a good thing because I have some problems with some buildings in Amsterdam because everything is UNESCO. Okay, how can we do that? So there was the question for the major shopping street to help the owners to behave within, say, UNESCO while keeping. So this was the test element. It used to be a living street in Amsterdam like this, and then it became in the 50s. They modernized it, and then recently they turned it into this, the Amsterdam version of Avenue Montaigne or of Pariska. So there was funny to see, and they wished also more this kind of aspects to come in, where more glass could be come in. But how to do that with like a cute city like Amsterdam, and to imagine that. So we looked at the building, looked to the drawings of 1850, and saw that it was like this. That in the meantime, they did this, they make it simpler. This was the American architect from Chanel that wanted to do this. My horror, this is what is neo-vernacular, the worst period in time in architectural history. So if we talk about history and how to treat it, this was a thing, don't do it. Then do it really with the original, but do it then in glass, we suggested. So that looks good like this, and okay, like also the details like this, beautiful roof you could make, and then you have like a beautiful, say, view on the park that would be screened by UNESCO beauty, is what we imagined. So, and then he said, no, you cannot do that, because we need to have normal bricks also. Oh, how much? We asked. Yeah, we don't know. So we investigated like all around how much percentage is brick. So you see 36% of the facade is brick, 16%. So we ended up with 21% as the average. So we said, okay, what can we do here? This is what we wish. But yeah, you don't. Yeah, you want actually this, but I'm not going to build this. So in the end, we ended up with this 20% formula to have that then expressed in it, and then. Okay, you have to prove it. You go to Venice, you talk with one company, they make glass, and they did it 5 times in the process, but yeah, you can remelt it, so that, again, the word re comes in. You glue it together, and we needed this kind of dentists to do it, to find a good glue. So these Italian girls that made these crowns, working with these engineers to test it, how that would work, and super expensive stuff. And with the UV value, push it again. Okay, it works. These are the powers. In red, we have to do something. Yes, because it needs to be stiffer. So we need to add beams on the back of it to make that gives this kind of stability. Blue, so it's okay. So we go further. Also, the wood panels to come in. And then this is next to Schiphol Airport, the big hall, to put in all the stuff together, montage them in. You get also the windows. Oh, I forgot the beams on that port, still red. So we glued in these arches, which I think are the most beautiful part of that building, and that glues together. And then the most expensive part is the gradual transformation. How do you glue brick on glass? You know that it's impossible, so we have to glassify the core of the brick to make it. And then I still love this 2 years that we spent on the site. Because every brick needs 2 hours to dry. So imagine this people with tattoos, thick fingers, you know them, and but so carefully doing it, while the Italian girls are looking to every crown is well positioned. It has a kind of poetry, I think, that we have to achieve also in our production processes. So what is next? Now you see here that how this glassification is monumental. It's the youngest monument of Amsterdam with it, and you will, which I'm very happy to see it. So how it looks like from different angles, I think that's kind of important, so that you can see sometimes solid, sometimes transparent. How people want to touch the building. I think never that you want to, that happens almost never, and how it's inside. The products of Chanel were much better after this than to look at it. Now it's Hermes, by the way, that comes in the end, and how it gradually moves in. So what is next also in the evening, again, a touching point to do that. So what's next after that? 2018, I go to Moscow. Then it was still possible to go there and what to deal with. It was the competition of Zaryadye that I would like to remember. You know, Zaryadye is next to the Kremlin, an empty spot. And this empty spot has housed Jewish communities. It has housed one of the 8th sister was there, planned in and half built. Russia Hotel, the 60s hotel was there, with the highest amount of, was the biggest brothel, I think, in Europe. So it had an amazing history to show, which I didn't know. So we were like looking, what are the traces of the past? So every color represents what has happened then, from the Jewish village towards, say, this Russia moment over time. And if you look at the X-ray of that area, then it describes, how can I say that, the process of history and the struggle. This is a place that is actually a social or a war is happening on that, that is notified by that. So we thought, how can we then use that as a base and transform it into a park where you can notate these kind of elements, make it, glassify it where possible, so that it becomes a dance floor for the city where this history is celebrated. Through all its parts, in combination with plants. So there is, of course, there you can see the tree gardens that are made in this garden. There are the houses of the Jewish community that are somehow in this zone. There are the public buildings that are at a certain moment in the history that becomes this kind of elements. There are these courtyards that deserve its treatment like this, surrounded with this other kind of, say, buildings that are there. The parking below is a kind of, that was needed, is basically a pergola where the plants and the glass are on top of it, so that light comes in. There's in the center there the 8th sister could be imagined as a hologram, so that I can walk over it and see its perspective. I can do the Russia Hotel in a sequence of transparent ponds where light comes from below, and then like showing in this case, and also then the promenades, the connections that we would be this kind of tundras that go from east to west and make this kind of viewing lines on that. So it creates a puzzle with a gateway to Moscow in the very hard hill that you could, where you could climb and have the overview, and where the Philharmonic Hall would be, say, simply a lifted piece of that history, and that would be then the new gardens of Zaryadye, and could lead to this kind of, say, sequences to be together, but also to think about this past. History has shown what is next. This is what is happening. Americans come in and they make lawns like they do everywhere in suburbia, and then also in Russia, another lawn covers the history. I'm cynical about that, to be honest. I like that the park is working. It's, of course, a place to do it, but somehow what can we do more to in this act to beyond, say, the lawn that has flown in. So what's next is 2019, again Moscow comes in. And in this case, with a Fonka mansion, a transformation next to the Kremlin into a hotel. And it is a place that looks at the moment like this, next to this, by the way, also a copy of a building that is made on that case, with an interior that is not dominated by UNESCO, but an interior Pushkin also made a lot of things. These are the building over time in this last. So at the same moment we investigated what the building looked like in all these epochs with the different users and owners that the Fonka has made. And if you draw that on top of each other, then I think this is, the most beautiful drawing that I could make as an architect. Right? Because if I zoom in, then you see how, if I make that into glass, then every piece of that history becomes somehow visible in this hotel that is going to be there. So here, how to translate then this beauty by showing that in the facade, in different say treatments, by say a room, the Palati room, where every piece of material from glass to stone celebrates a certain moment in time and leads to this kind of viewing. How the ballroom can be imagined with its stories. How the hotel room is dealing with these notions even into the bed. Could this split, and that would then celebrate and is celebrating the X-ray. At the moment, it's on hold, the project, but still that would be then like a way of dealing with the history and give it a place of innovation and of development. 2019, what is next? Seoul is, I take you to Paradise Casino over there. I mean, they made this Paradise City, which is like an architecture done by an American firm, looks corporate, could have been in many places over the world. And what can we do? We are asked to make two things, one casino and one nightclub for MGM, and two entertainment center to do that. So these are the two boxes. We had to, for many reasons, we have to bend this to connect it. And we thought, what is a nightlife during the day? And because during the day, I think we should do something like the Chirico's painting, that you are in, that you enjoy basically surroundings that are horrible. If you go to Vegas during the day, it's terrible, but in the night it becomes alive. So how can we do that? So we projected all the facades of the neighbors onto our building, so that somehow you feel that we are in a city, in urbanism, where these things are relate, and not in a kind of, say, mainly golden element. And here how we open it up where needed. We had one spotlight, so when you land in Seoul, you can see it in this corner, the entrance, and that is then what we added to it. How does it look like? So here you see one of the entrance. I go to further around the corner. I see how the relationship is between this and that one. The imprint of the neighbor is there. I'm neutral in its architecture, and somehow it becomes part of the walk. It is as if it belongs there and takes it, but gives it a twist. How the spotlight is working, the detailing of that imprints, including the doors for the nightlife, how it's lifted at a certain moment so that the nightlife becomes more visible, and what effect that has on the imprint. If I go to over the corner, I can see it even more there, and also this lifting act leads to a super interactive installation for the entrance to the disco. And leads to that. So in the evening, this kind of austerity becomes then, say, it comes more alive and leads to this kind of cohesion. So also in that kind of environment, you can sometimes try to cohese and turn it from an object into a city, and the history comes alive. I end with the last one, with the Beekvliet one. What is that? The Beekvliet is my old school. So, but the school is a bit old. 1798, written in this book. It started as a priest's education seminary. It led to this endless complex. It was the hostage camp in the Netherlands in the World War II. And it had a lot of history. So also in 76 I was there, and you're on the sports field. I think you can see me somewhere there. You're there. So what to do that? So what's next? A couple of years ago, we were asked to look to the extension and to see what that building could look like. Everything has changed in Roman Catholic Netherlands. So, and with a canteen, what to do? So we ended up with a renovation, a very simple new aula to make it where Tribune would celebrate the gathering and extends the library up to the end. There's not much money, so you cannot do too much, but it's a nice space. We paint it blue, so that it becomes the Blauwla, as it's called, the blue aula, Bluela, and that in a way is calm, chosen by the students. But we found, of course, in this email, I say that it misses something. So what can we do if we do this? Yeah. So we said, can we not do something more interactive? So in a month later, we gave this as a canvas for discussion, and we said, what can we do? So the people, the students start to talk, what they want to show, something about Homer, something about the Greek. They had a lot of ideas of things that should come back from the whole area where it is, from the people who came from different, say, villages and different pieces of the history. Couldn't we put that then in place? So we made a map of all the stories that the students have made, and from old students to new students, and that's what it is. And we said, can't we then project that on that building? Here you see it happening on that facade together with Canadian artists. It comes to a zenith point, an apex as we call it, and then it goes up in a sorting device to a position. And then you see the names of all these, say, contributions that are there. They are turned into stickers, into design elements, so you can go on with your history, and then history starts to show itself of this school that loves to be, say, like a bit like My Secret History of Donna Tartt, a little bit different than other kind of schools, and what you can see here in this kind of images emerging. Here, how it all comes together in the entrance hall, and where you can see how all these elements are montaged in and directed towards its position and how it could look like. This was this led to almost like a movement of resistance in the village. This was too much, but too colorful, whatever. So we blended a bit the colors, to be honest, to adapt to it. You know, the Blauwla, how it is, and then applied it the last months. So you can see it now, how it's gradually emerging and how it becomes like an object that summarizes the history of this school. And the project contains also stickers that can go over it. So every year there are a couple of new stories to be added. It has a website where you can see the stories, and it's like a way to deal with the history of that part and to go further with its character that is on that place, and hear how this party place is coming alive. Next paper day. So, are you tired? Shall I still finish with another part of the history? There are two elements still to say in it. And it could go quicker, but that's how it is. So what's next? Extensions is another technique of thinking about the continuation of history. So again, what was before? I take you to minus 2600 to start this piece of the story. What happened at that moment in Troy? I was already talking about Trojan horses, but you can see it when you go to Troy. This is the city, and this is from above. And this is the section of the city with all these towns on top of each other. I find that beautiful. This is how one of the most intriguing cities comes to your fantasies, basically. And if you make a map out of it, then this is what we, at that moment, also did in Moscow, you can say, but to deal with that. But it's also about extension. So what is the next? I took you to 1970. Prague has a wonderful one. One of the best buildings in Prague is this kind of this extension. Say, as brutal, as beautiful that it can be. Is this Baroque? Can this now be seen not as one of the gifts that has been made by architects to live with the old and to continue with it? So what's next? At 2012, the Vertical Village project is going now from this desire of developers, but confronted with a young generation that wants this kind of houses, and then turn it into a stack that is now leading to this. After many years, the coming year, it will be realized, this kind of so I'm super happy and proud that it can be there in a way, and to have a kind of vertical, say, density that is human and extends almost, is showing the history of making. Participation is here very clearly visible in that project. So what is next? We did that with a village a little bit. On top of this house, we made a village. And as a test to show that we can extend history in the UNESCO zone, but give it another color. I know I put it in the committee only in black and white drawings and put a RAL color on the corner, but it's it went through. So that was good because it looked old, so it was kind of good. And we advertise this basically from everywhere in the city. You can see this blue thing as a technology or a technique to densify our environment. But what is next? 2022. That's now what happens now. We are working on the complete roof plan of Rotterdam. So that makes it, there's 18 square kilometer of flat roofs because of the bombardment. There are no, so what to do there? So we investigate some kind of software. Some of the students were doing that, Solarscape. If you densify, but you have to cut it because of the sun, you get this kind of beauty with this kind of programming in it, and becomes in that way, the next envelope that we could imagine of the settlement. The second element is the roofscape is basically inventorying of like laws of construction techniques and also say real estate value, and that makes this kind of categories of roofs that come alive. And then we make say examples what you can do with the different typologies, just starting with like this or you add that. A complete catalog has been made that transforms. Then gradually this addition could be over Rotterdam. And I think that took a while to get it. And but the second layer of Rotterdam, this new Troy, that could be then imagined, is then soon there. The bridge that we made half a year ago is part of that operation to show that you can go over the buildings, that you can actually construct it. This is the mini version of Metropolis of Fritz Lang. You can walk over it and you can meet each other. It creates these picture points. And you can test different vegetations and different treatments. It leads also to a new act in Rotterdam, to have that every new roof should be thicker, so that we can do this in the future more easily, this kind of new village that could come on the top. And I'm very happy that that is installed as a... So the relationship between juridical instruments and architecture is much stronger than you think, and also how to deal with history, but give it like a meaning, is what this wants to do. What was before, again, I want to show what the students also worked upon it. I was in '87, there was this Indecem, so you see me here with some other students. You see Herman Hertzberger in this position, you see Aldo van Eyck, and you see Rem Koolhaas at the same moment. So I was, of course, a kid of these three characters, where Rem was about like metropolitan thinking, where Herman was about social thinking, and where Aldo van Eyck was about the in-between space between everything. So what is next? 2002, I wrote a letter to Herman to ask him to solve one building he made in Utrecht, but to add theaters in it, and that's ultimately responded to that. That's built now. The old hall is there, but it's covered with different architects on top of it. What is next? 2021. I had a client that owns this building, and he screwed it up. He's so commercial. He wants to get rid of this building and turn it into, say, normal housing. This was the moment that this is Centraal Beheer. You pronounce it nicer, at Centraal Bear, but it is the place where this kind of office space would be done. It's part of the structuralist movement in the Netherlands. Which is like beautiful because it's like an open bouwen. It's not a final building, what it says. I mean, that's something that doesn't exist almost in Czech Republic, that you make a structure and you fill it in. I don't care. And that is what this building is a bit about, leads to this kind of situation. But what's the situation at the moment? It looks like the Borobudur of the Netherlands. So it has this jungle that is covering the side. The facades are terribly treated at the moment. Inside, it's leaking everywhere. It is squatted in all the way. There's things that could be much more improved, and the roof terraces are leaking. Beautiful design elements in the gardens, in the jungle still, that are done. So can't we do something? So with Herman, we worked on what kind of concept can we do, and with my client. The client didn't want to meet Herman because he couldn't talk with him. No, he's too old and he's too stubborn. Okay. So you become a mediator That's in history happens a lot. So you mediate in time, and that's what this is then happening here at the office. How to deal with that? So what is next? Herman made a text, and he said, "What is most important in this building that it's not a fixed building, but that it can become a city as such." And he stresses that with certain kind of quotes. This is important because an architect that is alive has still the IP rights. So even if this becomes a monument, then he or she has still the right to change it or to do it. So we are on the right moment in time and he's 90, so I have to hurry up to get it arranged that his ideology of to keep structure, but a changeable structure as a main tool. So how to do that? This is the base of this centrale here. This is the structure that also the students have analyzed very beautifully here, which is very complex, to keep open corners, is what it basically says. This is the X-ray of that building. Whoa, I think this is different than in Moscow, but it's nice. So, and then you get rid of the technology tower, which is like a horrible thing. You extend the circulation inside to the outside so that it becomes almost urbanism, and you optimize the daylight by cutting away pieces, not the structure as we calculated, but basically the floors. And that lead then to this kind of studies. So can we still keep that, or should we go lower, and how much do we have to go to make it kind of like place where you can also live in? And that is because that has another kind of law category than offices, and that's what leads to this kind of spaces and kind of dreams that we are doing. We start to program it. It's like 60% housing, but also like breeding places that should be in. We added some extra, say, villas on the top, and then you get this kind of, and do everything in wood. Herman did it in bricks. Okay, fine, but you can see it here. And then the rest we do in wood. That's what you see in this photo montage. Here are the different houses, how to live in it. So there is a beautiful way to live in it. This is this H house, the Herman house, is I think a beautiful example of having wings even in it. And you give, say, a palette of material to the inhabitants that come to make within certain kind of rules, because yeah, it's between rules and freedom, to have this kind of exploration and to do it done in that. So what's next? This has to be paid. This cost about 60 million euros, and the client doesn't want to pay for it. And we have no monuments money in this case. So that what to do then? We say, okay, why don't we use the environment to compensate for this? And how to do then this extra program, which is cheaper, to make that then, to repair this, but by extending basically the grid in the gardens, and to get rid of that stupid building in that middle part, then to renovate these buildings by Herman in a more commercial way, to transform the rock, to continue the gardens, and to place on that base like houses that deal with that payment, and what density do I need to have this, say, kind of neighborhood. So this is more or less, say, 650 houses will pay this 50 million. So that is, then you have, and how it will look like is that it somehow makes an assemblage with the rock. So it doesn't look for contrast, it wants to continue. This is a zoning plan at the moment, and so we are working on the rules of these houses to make that affordable. So what happens then? 2022, this is on, Herman becomes 90. Here is he is there. And in my space in Delft, and so you look to the debate. So we try to tell stories about 90 years and to grasp what he thinks in that evening. So to see if continuation would be thinkable after 90 years. And we ended up, of course, with some cake and cut it and gave it to him as a kind of celebration of this continuation act that we are doing. What's next? I take you to Amsterdam, because this example of Hertzberger went to the National Monuments Act. He said, we have more problems. And here, so you see, I take you to Tripolis. So 1988 is built. Where is it on this screen? Here. It's the last building of Aldo van Eyck. He made the orphanage, and he made that one. It's not that beautiful, because but it's okay-ish, but no one wants to rent it. So we thought it was a good idea to clean it up and to get companies in that are a bit hip, and now the European Uber comes in, but and also add and compensate that again because it's a lower price, such a kind of with a new building. So the daughter of Aldo is still alive, a very fantastic girl with a woman of 85 with her husband, British architect. We developed it further. So we worked with his sketches, these are the interiors, to open it up, and we start to work first on the existing. So to clean it up, to do that also on the floor plans, get rid of some of the boxes, so that you have a kind of Stonehenge interior feeling, put some of the new transport elements outside, and then you have this kind of space. Add the terraces with stairs, with greenery, and then you get this composition. Then we pay it off in the same way with a building that is next to the highway, so that shelters the two buildings as a park. And you can do this this would be an efficient building, but Aldo protests, so he pushes it back into that building. So we do an echo of that existing building into the new one that leads to a street that goes in between, exactly the point of Aldo van Eyck, and that spans over this building and creates this kind of shelter of that building. And here how the sequence of terraces are then imagined, and how the street, the in-between street and space is then considered as the central space. So under construction, went very quick. We built this in 1 year, so it can happen. You can do it also here quick if you want to. Inspired by Prague to do that and to see how it would look like. How now we are getting into that space, into the streets, and how it will open in a half year from now. Chapter 9, I go to the green dip for a moment. That is also a way of optimizing the history. We adapt our buildings to the future. And it wasn't, when I looked at Chernobyl, the film of this man and on BBC, and you see what that has become, then you see that history has transformed to this kind of feeling. And it is not only men that live in this environment, also animals live in it. So it's a kind of adaptation of a certain kind of program. So how can we do that? And I showed that in Prague when we do it very short. That we would love that this would be in the future, an historical area like this would transform into an adaptation to nature, to oxygen, to CO2 carriage. So we have to design it from bottom up by making this green maker where every plant is analyzed, what it does and what it needs and what it gives. And that then you do it in all the products that you can imagine, from roofscapes to pipework, to make that possible. You look at, say, different cities. You're one piece in New York, and you select the products, you put them on the facades, put them on the tops, put them in the interior, put them on the public space, and finally New York becomes nice. And actually it does something back to what it consumes. And then you get this as a Fifth Avenue dream, which we, by the way, one element we will show quite soon. So here it adapts itself, and it has the same form, but it's biological, and it gives, say, cooling to the planet, 1 degree, if we do it for all the buildings, that could be then imagined. So what is next, of course, is that we also allow it for animals, this kind of characters, that eat each other, and how can you facilitate that to the products, put that on these products also on the canvas, and then you get this kind of new products that are good for rabbits and for birds, and that leads to this kind of composition, where then at that moment this could be the new European capital that we could imagine. So what is next in this case? And now we are working on food city integration. This is New York, how Manhattan is there, how much it consumes, and how much to compensate that. You can do that in New Jersey, but for the sake of the discussion, we started to see of how much you can then do in a stacked format. It would be the nicest Freedom Tower ever done, I would say, or you decompose it and that every building does it, and then you get this, what every building basically consumes and needs to be compensated. This is Troy 2.0, I would say, if this would happen. I cannot guarantee that, of course, but it helps a little bit of the understanding what the burden is of our time in order to take that further into it. I think our Tainan example is helping on that. When you have a very terrible city as Tainan, which is gray and there's no trees, and you have this building from a Chinese epoch, then the first thing what you do is to transform it into a cooler of the environment by getting rid of the building, but keeping memories of the past, and then, say, flooding it with water, with plants that cools the area. So this is what it is now. In between the ruins, like in a film of Tarkovsky, you can swim and hang out on these places. And somehow it worked, because it has a drop of 4 or 5 degrees in the environment, and day and night people are somehow enjoying that composition. So this new layer could be okay in certain cases to add that to our classical context. And what's then next? Of course, in that way, the depot is also a little bit helping on this green dip with this kind of forest on the roof. I think also our valley will do that the coming year with the stairs, but also with all the plantation that is over there and leads to these new landscapes that can be imagined, but that somehow addresses then this combination of it. I end with my conclusion, and that's the last one. How much is the timing? Okay, it's correct. Yeah? Chapter 10. I want to talk about urbanism. I know, it's not a favorite subject here, because it's not always that successful. You do more and more, and I love that Florence is coming more alive. And I think it has, there you have a role to work with time and on time, is what it does. So I give you 3 examples. I remember still Bupny, and because this is an answer to that show, how that place could, say, become part of, say, this area between Letna and Holosovice. And by just adding all the connections that are there in that area, it would become, I think, a beautiful city that would be then gratuitously almost done. And it is transforming this gap into something like that in a way. Then everything is Baroque, I would say, in a very in an updated manner, where the existing new station will be better, and embedded in this kind of environment. So that was an exercise, which is partly going to happen in your country, to deal with history, but on the other hand, also update that in terms of connections in this case, and avoid this kind of square block terror that is sometimes happening. So I think Grand Paris was also about that, adding to the existing stuff something. We made this calculator to say to the mayor and to the president, you have to calculate your efforts to make Paris better. And if you compare Grand Paris at the moment with other cities in the world, you can see that the public transport is not so much used as you think, and not so good as in Hong Kong. That the car is still dominating. That in that way there's a whole chart of things, how you are good and how you are bad. And if you want to be better, that is the agenda, what you could do. And this is the optimization act of doing it. We translated that in how much do I need to do, or to add, or to transform into order to optimize this climatic performance. I need to change the water amount of it. I need to have more solar panels. I need to have wind energy. I need to change the housing because it's this almost asocial. I need to have another kind of shopping in it. The whole sequence was done, and then we start to make a map how to combine it with the existing. So we could imagine that all the roofs of the existing would become these solar parks, which is beautiful, because then this Haussmann gets a kind of meaning and transforms this into such a kind of agenda. I can imagine that transport will be better when we stop with the stupid final stations, Gare du Nord, and where we have to go to my journey to Lyon, to Bordeaux, and then you make a new, say, central station that's here studied with this kind of a new station on the Place de la République that becomes then this beautiful, say, new, say, dance floor, and that would repair Gare du Nord and Gare de l'Est, the 2 stations, into new neighborhoods at that moment, because we sync that composition. We would transform in that process also the Boulevard Périphérique and add there a new metro line that transforms this into a kind of a new, say, park on top of it with the buildings that are now partly under construction. So this was an update. So pieces of that view of making a smaller Paris, more compact in that way, and repair that Paris is now, you can see the new towers emerging, you can see the solar strategy done. So after 10 years, the first things are happening in this update of Haussmann. So Haussmann becomes, in that way, a facilitator. That would be, I think, a fantastic project to just think about it. I don't say if it is possible for your historical cities, but it would help to update them. In Bordeaux, afterwards, we do similar elements. It's opposite of UNESCO on the right side. This is UNESCO in Bordeaux. And when you go through it, it's a beautiful town. It's very bourgeois. Go over the bridge. Garonne is white. So that's UNESCO, and that is not. So that not part is dominated by Napoleon, his army, who made this and villages with very kind people. So we do the first part of the transformation of the east side. So this has a lot of memories of the past. Rails, hangars for military, and monuments of the villages. So what can we do? We can say we do every piece is a building plot, and that's to start with. And then you make an offset of those buildings of 6 to 10 meters to make narrow streets for shadow is very important. And you have this extra plots that you could do. And that leads to this kind of network. So inscripted in the old, you make a new city of about, say, 4,000 houses that come in it. Which this is the spaces that are imagined. Sometimes they're bigger, you can put something outside. You extrude them, and then the mayor said, this looks too much like Hong Kong, correct? So you chop them for light, so that it gets sufficient light that you can live on ground floor. You chop them for a certain kind of sun, not too much, but in certain moments, so your sun maker is then further, say, developed, and you accommodate where needed. You use 140 architects to interpret it, this landscape. You cover it with solar panels, and is part of it. And this is how it's a blonde village, or blonde city, with a density about an FAR of 2.4. That is almost like Berlin, with narrow streets. And these are the solar scapes that we now construct, that are done with this kind of cute streets that are there, and this new kind of landscape of albedo effect and solar panels that make it. And then I can make a walk through that city that is, I think, surprising. So history does it. And in the performance in the winter is that there is light and a sufficient temperature, and in the summer there are trees that shelter that. And that is tested in our models. And that works out. This is then the landscape plan and how it will look like, this kind of emerging albino hills in this new Bordeaux forest. There is a problem with water because it floods sometimes the river in blue, which is actually a good idea. So what we do is make cellars on every building so that water can be stored there. We had to change French law because it's impossible because of the insurance system they have. But the Dutch do it, why not there? So that happened because Alain Juppé was the mayor, so he could do it. These are all the bassins. It becomes like the citerne like in Istanbul, and how the projects are now going on. So you see now the first, say, mountains appearing how this is the layer of Pompeii, as we call it. These are all the elements where the water will be stored. Here how they are covered, and how now the small streets are coming up. And when sometimes the building can be higher because there's another street, so you don't have a problem with the light at that moment. But the cuts in the building show exactly the relation between the sun and the neighbor, is what it does. So I think it's a very cohesive, one could say, neighborhood. It starts to be cladded. This is the first streets that are coming up, the first courtyards with the gardens, how they interact with itself, how they step for step, 141 buildings, so I need 10 years more or less for doing that. But then it starts to come at the moment, and you see how people react on it. You do a kind of crater of green that makes this park so architects can react on with surprises every time to make a neighborhood that is working. And it's, on one hand, it's classical. It forms the logic of the entrepreneurs. It's a kind of updated UNESCO, I would say, was what we are doing here. The same laws, same gabarit, as it's called, angle to describe the existing town, and same blondness or the whiteness of the buildings are there. But you get an update, and you see how it would act in this relationship between UNESCO 1 and I guess UNESCO 2 in the future on this side. So what is next? I take you to Mannheim, another urbanism over there. This is the American Kaserne in Mannheim. It's a place where we are making about 12,000 units of housing in a city that's growing quite substantially, and using partly the existing of that. And I will show you only a piece of it, because it's a big strategy to work with many developers to transform this monotony into interpretation of the past, but also add new things. So we've agreed on 50% should be state, and others should be reinterpreted. So this was how it would look like, this barrack camp of that time, how we act on it, how we keep all the material, I come back to that later, and then start to work on this composition of old and new. And in the very heart, we make a new center. And how to make a center of it? By a couple of ways. We make a better connection. We cut what I couldn't do in Berlin, I do it in Mannheim. So when we cut through all this building, one owner, so you can do it, and make this new street in it, we gather all the debris of the buildings in one hill, so that at one point I can have a view over it, and I can cover the Lidl, I know, so because their facades were horrible, so that makes it also bearable, and we make more density around it with this series of high-rises. So here you see the debris hill with the Lidl below, how the new Europa-Achse is made. It's a meridian, so it can continue up to Helsinki, but, and how the old and the new are combined in this pattern of it. I don't talk about the church, but how the view can be then facilitated over this area. Now here the cut is under construction, so existing building are at the moment working on. Here how the hill is developed and the high-rises that surround it. So how the hill becomes this supermarket area and turns into this collective point, how we use the hill also to stage one golden monument in it. One of the barracks becomes the example of solar panels, the new golden solar panels, that the whole building will be wrapped by it, so that it shows hopefully an update of these classical components. And then it's surrounded by towers. How to make a group of towers that is nice. So we thought about statues, but then maybe an H would be good, because you have a bridge between these two towers. Maybe one which has a beautiful pop podium inside with a stair and have this kind of O feeling. One where as an entrance to the area can act with the sports club on two, and becomes the new Brandenburger Tor of Mannheim from the highway. And then, this is by Albert Speer, a building with bigger balconies that turns it into an E, and it makes, I think, the word home finally there. From Heim to home. This gives address to Merkel's, say, campaign, who loved it. And here you see it under construction. This is of last month, I think, on this, how this center is emerging and how it can combine history with perspective and with view. And then I end with my last small conclusion. What is then next? Actually, I showed a collection of interpretations. I think collecting, like this table, is a kind of beauty. Collecting people is a beauty of differences that can be done. So what did we do recently for the Art Basel and for Fries, is to make a kind of interpretation of collecting. A small film that dreams of a city where everything is artistic, because mostly everything is functional and boring, 90%. Artistic is more than only beauty. It's also about freedom, it's about criticism. And that could turn our cities into kind of biennales of interpretations. So this is a collection of art that our client collected for his shows, which is beautiful, because it's The variety from all the ages is turning it into something super nice. So if we, this is a question of urbanism, how to sort it. We can sort it through buying. We can sort it like categories, which is a sculpture, which is a painting, like we did in the depot. We can sort it by colors. We can show it by authors, by age, etc. So there are many ways to think about urbanism or about beauty, how to deal with it. I mean, this is what it shows if I make like simply a suburbia of beautiful artistic houses. It would be super cool to make that somewhere. So we aim at the moment in one of the examples in the Netherlands to do it like that. We can also make it more compact. So turn it into objects. This is all houses like a vertical village, but then turning it into an artistic combination where you work with an artist to make this extra object. I wouldn't mind to walk through this city and to have this kind of perspective of wandering. You can sort them here, like this is the street of portraits. This would be nice for Wall Street in New York. And how I feel always as a wanderer of this, like these puppets are showing. Or go to the abstract plaza. Also a nice one. This was like encourage ourselves to collaborate with artists, to break a potential more for that, to think like artists, to think what a good object can be, and then try to optimize and to show it. We can make a tower out of it. When do we make this in the end? Or I can do something with an artist and turn it into the biggest puppy on the planet. It's a cloud of art, a cloud of, say, artistic, architectural objects that float around us. To turn it into a cityscape is what this is celebrating, this small film. That somehow emphasizes the idea of beauty and collection as a way of bringing it together. And maybe we can turn then the planet into a kind of art planet, it was this wants to say. So what's next? I think I showed a little bit about the way of dealing with history and thinking about it as endless, a field of or repertoire of reconsidering and considering. Not as kind of things that freeze, but things that can be activated and that can develop its the evolutionary aspect that we need beyond the freezing. And maybe then retrotopia shakes then hands with biotopia. And then Prague would meet Brno again in this kind of dialectic lectures that I made this week. I hope, or this week's, and I hope with that this somehow helps to understand it a little bit better and to try to work or to help with you, to work with you on these different, say, situations in Prague and in Czech Republic. I invite you for the coming half year also. We work with your university and with Liberec and with a university in Prague to imagine fantasies for the Czech Republic, and of course that we should bring it then later in the end of the year to your government, to that dreams can be enlarged, I would say. You make them, but they can be bigger. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, we have only 15 minutes because Avatar 2 starts at 8. So do you have any questions? You have only 15 minutes, so don't wait.
Thank you so much for the great presentations. It was beautiful. So you mentioned about history, and then I would like to bring the quote from the Alberti. So Alberti said the city is like a great house, and then houses in town are small cities. So when you're working with like big urban scale project and a small on the other hand, working small project like house, is there any like different design procedure or like approach, or it's kind of similar things for you?
If I understand you well, you're talking about scale. Do I want to make a house and do I want to make a city? And that is, I mean, I'm interested in both. So I showed last time, it's true that details are very important, and to express in smaller elements what you want to do on the bigger picture, in a way. I still love also, I mean, in landscape architecture, they do it by nature. They make gardens and they make dreams about super landscapes. Architects normally concentrate on smaller elements, don't think that much on urbanism, to be honest. These two professions have been separated a bit. So that is, I think, what kind of house would I make? If it could be another question that you ask. There are millions of different houses that you can do. And it's not the subject of today, to be honest. I think that is another lecture that we could explore on what could be the perfect collection of millions of housing. That is how to test that. That's another kind of urban plan we need for that. We need another kind of, say, choreography, another kind of laws sometimes to do that. We try to do that by enlarging this liberty in other kind of urban plans so that people can do what they want, but they cannot harm their neighbor. So that creates already a very beautiful, say, landscape of different houses that we could imagine. It's a bit Asian, I know, that it could be where this kind of richness can be seen also in its village-like approach. But that could be a way, but how do you want to live is, of course, your question also. And there is a big discussion. Do you want to live in a city or not? Do you want to share or not? Are you happy with proximity or not? Do you love your neighbor and your other people that are surrounding it? We can help them a little bit to make our cities more human and more believable. That's what I think houses can contribute to. And so the role of the house is. But on the other hand, if I look to the university in Prague, they study houses already for zillion years, and all the studios are about that. So which is good, but so maybe that's why you ask the question also. why does the university do that? And then we need maybe also like other compasses to direct that discussion a bit. So I try to add to that. One is the historical component, the other one was the future component to address that in our houses and to give it a bigger picture and a bigger agenda is what I emphasize today. So no further answer I can give on your question because I didn't show it. That's,
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the lecture. I want to ask about the last part about the urbanism and actually big scale buildings or areas. Do you think there is some space for the evolution for another layer? And in what time you're thinking that it's possible to add another layer? Because in my I see it as a really direct and large scale areas, and I personally can't see any space for another layer for now or for another 100 years.
Well, that's a critical question, and because I don't know, and I think also that is exactly the beauty. The other thing, what I think is important in urban planning, is that not only you allow it for easily your question can lead to neutral buildings. Easily, we are going to make more grid buildings on the planet than ever before. And that's a danger. In the whole of Germany has this kind of bird cages, I call them, of neutrality. because neutrality could solve that. And there's an enormous danger in that, because it leads also to boredom. So I think that even in urbanism, we need to develop character. A character, how do you create that? How does it come from? I showed now with Mannheim a character of living with the barracks and living with the story that comes out of the barracks. I showed in Bordeaux basically living with the past, but give it a kind of update of an ecological manner, and you get a kind of, I think, an amazing landscape of buildings that come together and that makes space which is intimate and where you like each other, hopefully, and where still the sun comes in and but creates sufficient shadow. So it's very, there's a relationship with the place, that's what I can say. But what I see in many urbanisms, that because of what you say, that they all look the same, also in the Netherlands. They're all, and I think when you set the character, people can react on it. And can we expect everything? Can I do everything in every urbanism? No. Also, that's financially, I mean, with the margins of like 8 to 10% of profit that we can use to work on it, I can do one character out of that. Would I love to make a complete green covered neighborhood? Yes, I'm working on it. That would be one of the next, say, to use that budget basically for that. So you can choose with it. And is there an ideal future neighborhood? No, hopefully not, in a way, because I dream also about this diversity of neighborhoods that we can create. I think we have to allow ourselves to create these characters. I think if we could implant within Bordeaux neighborhoods that take the pieces of the origin but give it a twist, done by you as an architect, done by you as an architect, so the two authors that would do that, then I think the city becomes more interesting and gets more, say, but to give someone, an urbanist, space for doing it, it is so rare. That's why we almost don't know any urbanists over the planet. Most of them are city planners that do it, and they want to do it neutral because they don't want to make mistakes, and they want to keep it open in a way, and completely correct and understandable. But it also avoids sometimes the concept of like something new that you need to force somehow to put it in. So it's a good question how to interpret it. And I have not a systematical answer, because I in order to say to refrain from that hyper neutrality that would damage, I think, the European cityscapes as such. Because I think your city deserves to be different than Berlin or than Rotterdam. But we can learn from each other to already think about. I mean, of course, there are things that we all share. We want to be greener. We want to be cooler. We want to be to get the water in. We want to be more social and more free, more democratic, please, to do that. So that you can do and your neighbor can do something else in it. But that goes within that framework to give it character. But then it comes back. I think in the volumes of Bordeaux, the variety of houses is enormous because of these weird shapes. And then the developers are complaining to me, how can I solve that? Exactly, that is the point. But now you get houses in an attic that are sometimes much more nicer to it. So this is this game, I would say, between these generic constraints of the future, which we all have, and we share it more and more with, than, say, a specific translation on a place in the world, with a literal climate that's different in Bordeaux than in Brno, with a literal political climate that is different, or a cultural climate that's different. I think that is the art that we should do. And let's make a biennale soon in Venice, where we show that better, how different Porto can be. Let's fantasize that. Let's do that also in our next studio, then in the coming half year, to see that Liberec can be really different than Olomouc. That is or that regions can be much more stronger and create that kind of different identities. That's the puzzle of our future that deals with the collective, but also with the biodiversity of it. That's what I would propose to maneuver through your question, because to show the understanding, but also the danger behind it.
Thanks.
Last question.
I lost my voice.
So, no one? So I have one. You mentioned that we are between fear or insecurity and freedom. Of course, your work is full of freedom, and you also have an experience how the result of your work has, what kind of reactions of society it has. We don't have this kind of experience. So I would like to ask you, because I believe it must change the society. And what is your experience about it?
Well, the freedom is also a world of experimentation. Freedom is the world of things that can go wrong, and that freedom is the world of things that are on the edge and edgy. Personally, I love that, because otherwise, why do I live? And there's an existential. I don't think that you don't have freedom. That is, as you say, there are marvelous buildings in your cityscapes that expresses that, and you refer to it when you talk about Tugendhat as an ultimate dream, almost of this place, or how some of the bigger structures from the communist times are actually fantastic somehow, and despite its regime. There is so you have also a culture of criticness, maybe too much in a way. You criticize each other dead, almost, is what I sense a bit in the architecture community. And it needs support to create for each other a little bit of more freedom, that you can do what you want. That's why I liked, and I explained that last time, in Tirana or in Albania, as an architect, I mean, basically people say, what do you want to make? Okay, that makes responsibility also bigger for you, actually. Because also you can... it's easy to hide ourselves behind rules. We complain in the end in the bar with a beer that, again, these rules don't allow for it. So we have to fight for that in a way, but it's also, that tames down, that I agree with you, the possibilities and the... So, but we have to together, I think, to make a culture where this kind of innovation can be done. And to support it. I think that you do more competitions these days is already very good. That they are public is already very, very good. That your zoning could be a little bit more open. That we try to do that in our cityscapes a little bit. That there's an investment pattern that not only on the buildings but also the in-between space that encourages that also much. So it's quite a package that is needed to create that more liberal feeling that we need to find in a way. I find it always very complicated here to talk about top-down and bottom-up, because top-down was not allowed because you had 50 years of existence of a regime which governed everything. So you're very skeptical on sometimes things that need to be shared, and that is on the edge of becoming unfruitful, because that leads to monsters of buildings sometimes that actually have no sense of collectivism or no sense of respect of the environment. So it's an interesting moment in time that I see here in your republic, and that I do think that this position can make it better. One of the places that is surrounded by countries that sometimes are not that democratic, that's what you can experience here. You have already made more trust in each other, especially in the last years. Maybe it's not completely symbolized yet, and we are waiting for a female president soon to do something on this. But that is. But there is already more than I mean, in this half year that I'm here, I see more possibilities to talk about it than before. I see also more opportunities to gain that, what you call freedom. But repeat it every time. How can we make something that is something more experimental in that way, and give that respect, that situation. So I will not if I criticize colleagues, I try to be supportive also, in a way. We need to build up also a system where criticism is constructive, but it also makes sense, is good constructivism. So we need to make articles that writes about your city. You need journalists to do that, and you need to talk about it. That's what these things are like today are a bit. That's why these questions that you have are a bit celebrating. So I do hope that will be encouraged a little bit. But you can do more.
We try. Okay, thank you very much.
And now to Avatar.
Any other question outside the hall?